a legal report that's 180 pages long. But what I hope to do in a few minutes, this is a very important discussion that's happening, and many thanks to the groups that co-sponsored it. What I hope I can do in the few minutes here is just to provide some information for those that may not know a lot about drones and what they're doing overseas. Given the way in which the program has been shrouded in secrecy, is to provide some information from our first-hand research about drones in hopes that it can inform the conversation about our role here at Stanford and what's happening with drones. So we are a legal clinic based at Stanford Law School, a group of faculty and students, and about 18 months ago, we, in partnership with NYU Law School, decided to investigate the civilian consequences of drone strikes. At the time, the major narrative about drones was of a surgically precise weapon, a weapon that was able to kill terrorists, between quotes, without any sort of effects on civilian populations. That was the way it was discussed. So we wanted to go to Pakistan and actually speak to those people who live under drones, those that are victims of drone strikes, those who have survived drone strikes, as well as those that live in communities where drones are overhead, and to really see whether or not this was the case. Our findings suggested that there are significant effects on civilian communities. We spoke to 130 people, again, including 70 people who survived a drone strike or who lost a direct family member in a strike. And let me share with you some of our major findings. First of all, drones do kill civilians. In our report, we document 3 strikes in particular. One strike that attacked a gathering of about 40 tribal elders that had convened to discuss a local dispute about an economic issue in their community. Another drone strike on the 3rd day of President Obama's administration that killed a 14-year-old and injured his killed many other members of his family and injured his first cousin as well. That strike again took place 1 day after President Obama issued his executive order to close Guantanamo Bay. And we now know from 2 books that have recently been published that Obama knew on day 3 of his administration that civilians were in fact killed in a drone strike, even though the administration has continued to insist that no civilians have been killed in drone strikes. We also document a 3rd strike that killed 5 individuals going home from work on a particular summer afternoon. Our research also suggests that the most credible estimates of civilian casualties are that between about 2,400 and 4,400 people total have been killed in U.S. drone strikes. Let's reflect again on that number. That's more than those that have been killed in the 9/11 attacks, that have been killed in extrajudicial killings outside of war zones. So that does not even include those killed by drones in Afghanistan, in Iraq, and in other places like in Palestine and Israel. Nearly 4,400 people. Again, the best estimates suggest that about 500 of these are civilians. And that number likely grossly underestimates the amount of people that actually have been killed in drone strikes. We know that the way drones kill, they obliterate organs, they incinerate the skin and the bodies of people around them. There's a blast radius that affects everybody in nearby communities. But I think more significant in some ways than the actual killing of drones is the larger consequences on civilian communities. And this, by the way, is affected by mere surveillance drones, which is some of the technology, as we understand, that's being worked on here at Stanford. So let me just paint to you a picture of life in parts of northwest Pakistan. There are areas in which drones fly overhead 24 hours a day. In some cases, 4 to 5 drones at a time. And the people who live under them have told us about how harrowing the experience is of going out and coming home and sleeping every day, hearing the buzzing sound overhead, and not knowing whether or not the drone is going to strike, not knowing whether or not your child or your husband or your wife will be able to come home from work that day or able to come home from school. We documented some of the effects of this everyday terror on civilian communities. Some of these effects include symptoms of PTSD, of anxiety, people of insomnia, people who have trouble sleeping, who have other health consequences as a result of the stress from drone strikes. Some of the consequences include people being afraid to go to school. Even some parents who have acknowledged that they've pulled their children out of school because schools have been struck in drone strikes. So imagine Stanford University, one of the leading global academic institutions, funding in technology that is causing fear that leads people to drop out of schools in parts of northwest Pakistan, in which education is a focus of U.S. aid dollars. We also know that drones have struck first responders, that the administration's policy of double tap strikes, or sending a second follow-up strikes minutes or hours after a first strikes, have killed those that have gone to rescue families or loved ones or neighbors in their community. We document this extensively in our report. We know that drones have struck funerals and have led many to be afraid to attend funerals of community members out of fear of being struck by a drone. The effects go on and on and on, and I encourage you to read our report and look at how it's affecting the economy and everyday life in northwest Pakistan. So I really want to conclude by saying that there are significant legal and strategic questions that are raised by these policies, even if we don't care about the human consequences on everyday life. Just to sketch a few of these, it is highly doubtful that the current drone campaign, especially strikes on first responders, if they are taking place, are anything but a war crime. It is difficult to understand strikes that are called signature strikes, that don't target particular individuals, but actually target based on patterns of behavior, comply with established international legal principles like proportionality and distinction. It is difficult to understand whether or not drones comply with rules about being necessary when evidence suggests that the U.S. hasn't explored other means of dealing with threats that arise from drones. And finally, there are significant reasons to question whether drones actually make the United States or make the people of the world any safer. We know that the United States relies on the same intelligence to conduct drones as it did to put people in Guantanamo Bay. 90% of those, 90% plus of those in Guantanamo were never charged with a crime, but we're using the same intelligence to kill people overseas, nearly 5,000 of them. We also know that only 2% of those actually killed in drone strikes were high-level targets. So who are the rest of the people? In large part, we're talking about either low-level, quote-unquote low-level militants, but given that the United States, and we document this again in our report, classifies all military-aged men in a war zone to be combatants, absent evidence after the fact that they're actually civilians, suggests that the 98% may not just be, in fact, low-level militants, but in large part could be masking significant civilian casualties. We also know that beyond just the safety questions, there are questions about whether or not drones are good geopolitically. 76 countries now have drone technology. We know that drone technology is spread across the globe. We are now at a key moment not too different from post-World War II when we face the specter of drones changing the face of geopolitics and international war. And finally, we know that drones even make democracy here in the United States, puts that deeply, deeply into question. We know that war is being waged without the traditional checks on executive power. We know that we've been misled about the nature of the drone program. We've been promised that not a single civilian has been killed when significant evidence suggests that this administration knew from its first days in office that civilians were indeed killed. So I'll wrap it up there. I think the major thing to take from this is there are civilian consequences, and it's critically important we examine here at Stanford what our role is in furthering the technology that is, significantly affecting civilian communities, that is undermining international legal protection and making the world more unsafe. Thank you.